Good afternoon, everybody, and everybody in the gallery. I'll open the City Planning Committee of the 23rd of August. We have almost a full contingent of councillors, so I won't name everybody. Thank you for joining us. I will note before we start that we do have the ABC and the SBS who have requested to film the debate. Start off with confirmation of minutes from the previous meeting. Deputy Lord Mayor, all those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. It's carried. Consideration of supplementary items. Are there? None. Indications of pecuniary and conflicts of interest. Anybody? Nope. Very good. Transfer of agenda items. I think this is the only item on the agenda. So we'll go straight to items of deputations. We do have the one, obviously. Thank you, Deputy. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Carried. Now, committee is now acting as a planning authority. Before I move the item on the agenda today, I'll just make a quick statement. Reminder to everybody who has applied to make deputations and elected members speaking during debate, open portion of the planning committee is live streamed and recorded. Parliamentary privilege does not apply here. So please respect the law, including the Anti-Discrimination Act and defamation law. Friday's elected member bulletin reminded elected members of requirements in the Code of Conduct regarding decision-making and non-financial conflicts of interest. While I appreciate that this is a very sensitive and hotly debated issue, of which I think everybody in this room has publicly made their views known, it is a sensitive one. I fully intend on allowing debate to run its full course and for elected members and the public to be comfortable that there has been a fulsome debate on this matter, but I am mindful that given the heat that this debate has seen, I'll remind everybody that we're discussing a planning application here and we're operating as a statutory authority. Fulsome debate will be allowed and encouraged, but if it gets into political commentary or personal reflections or interpersonal attacks, that won't be tolerated. So I just want to make that clear from the outset so people don't feel like I'm trying to shut them down during the debate. I just want to make that clear before we start off. So with that, I'll start with the item is 70 Macquarie Street, statue removal and temporary signage, item 6.1.1. We have 3 deputations. The first is from Mr. Chris Merridew. Ms. Merridew, if you want to come to that table just in front of you. Those microphones as close as you're able to. You'll have 5 minutes to speak, and I'll give you a warning when there's 30 seconds left, and then I'm sure we'll have some questions for you. Free to go.
I have just a point of order, Mr. Chairman, if I could. I've had circulated to the Alderman matter yesterday, and I've had 2 comments back. One is that I've been advised that we're only discussing the development application. In which case, I have a further question, is that respondents had to put their comments in approximately by 4 weeks ago today. 2 weeks ago, the Lord Mayor, in her capacity of Lord Mayor, published a document on the matters that were raised, have been raised over the weeks, but in particular focuses what came out of the Professor Pybus lecture 2 weeks ago, which is talking about the issues that we've not been able to comment on in the last 2 weeks.
What's the issue here? That's before we start the clock, what's the actual issue?
The issue is that if no comment from the last 2 weeks or last month's press can be brought up in my deputation, I felt that there was matters raised on the 10th of August by the Lord Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, we're going to have to get the clock started very soon. But
sorry, second.
It said we are going to have to get the clock started soon. However, you can raise whatever points in your deputation that you think is relevant to the planning application, so long as it's relevant to the planning application. There's no timelines or anything. It just, as long as the points that you're making are relevant to the planning aspects of the issue, you can say whatever you feel is appropriate.
Yes, but you're talking about the planning application to take the statue down. No other issue can be mentioned.
Yeah, yes, that's correct.
Okay.
We're ready to start whenever you're ready.
Thank you for that. I normally speak to the Council quite often on matters of heritage. National Trust has been an interest of mine for some 40 years, and 3 years ago I led a deputation to persuade the state government not to sell the Treasury buildings which adjoin where the Crowther statue is located. And I was supported by the public and by the media in that, and the government decided that the Treasury buildings perhaps were not theirs to sell, and they didn't sell. The Crowther statue was presented to the City of Hobart by the then residents, who collectively paid for it, had it built and had it erected. And it has worried me from the very beginning that of this development application that the Council is advertising to authorise itself, when seeking application, to remove a statue that possibly doesn't belong to them, from a heritage area, a heritage item from a heritage area. Now, I understand there are some respondents, 66% of the respondents did not want it removed, some 28% wanted it to go. Now, I quote from the Lord Mayor's article in the paper on the 10th of August, "Deciding to relocate the statue doesn't change history. Records, books, articles, dates and stories associated with the statue will all remain unchanged." I think that's a very fair and very correct statement. So the question is, why would I do it? Why do you want to remove the statue? Now, subsequent to the information that was been available up to date, yesterday it was announced that there will be an International Council of Monuments taking place in Sydney next week. People from all over the world will be coming to the biggest international conference on the matters of the Council of Monuments. In other words, other councils, other states, other countries looking at this particular aspect. I just want to raise those as relevant to where we are this evening. Now, the attitude, I think, of people generally in Hobart is that we value our heritage, and I was very pleased to see, published in the Mercury in June of last year, the Lord Mayor and the then Alderman Briscoe emphasising the need to protect our built heritage, valuing our built heritage and vowing to fight for its protection. And I really believe that what is happening tonight, or what has happened, is a very strong argument for the heritage of the statue to remain as part of a heritage where it is. Now, in support of that, I would like to suggest that the Council consider that the proposed descriptive panels are really totally out of keeping with to be placed in the heritage precinct. I know it's an architectural fad these days to put a 2024 addition onto a 1884 structure. Something like this was proposed in 1938 at St David's Cathedral, just across here. The bell tower was only built in 1938, but it was designed in 1988. And had the heritage approach, or the architect's approach, been in 1938, as it is today, we would have had a 1938 red Art Deco brick tower built where that sandstone tower is. So there is a precedent to try and keep what we do in heritage areas within long-term, not long-term acceptable terms. The other area that's come out of some of the information that's been made available.
30 seconds left, Mr. Mayor G, if you could wrap up.
30
seconds. 30 seconds.
Thank you. Is that Crowther has been concerned about the things that he may have done with his achievement of evidence from skulls whatever that may be. It was never proved conclusively. But what we do know out of that evidence is that Dr. William Crowther, as a head physician in the Hobart Hospital, would have helped with saving lives of some of our Aboriginal descendants who may well be descendants of our Tasmanian Aboriginal community.
Thank you, Mr. Merigi. That's time.
That, I think, is
Are there any questions? Councillor Dudder.
Thank you, Chris, for your presentation. I have two questions. Question number one is, do you think whether there are cultural heritage values to the Crowther statue? That's question one. Sorry. I'll ask again. The question number one for you that I would want your opinion on is that whether there are cultural heritage values of the Crowther statue. Is there heritage value in that statue?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It wouldn't have been put up by the citizens of Hobart at their expense had there not been substantial value held of him by the community in 1890.
Any other questions?
Thank you. I have another one. I'll actually give others the opportunity. Thank you, Chair.
Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Chris. Just a correction on the opinion piece that I think you're talking about was authored by myself and Alderman Damon Thomas.
Of the 10th of August.
Yes, I think so.
Is there a question?
And it was about the demolition of buildings. So I guess would you, given where the proposal would be that we actually remove the statue very carefully, conserve it, protect it, and potentially put it elsewhere, would you see the difference between that and just the complete demolition of buildings? They're not really the same, are they?
Well, I think the word demolition and removal is a little bit cross-purpose, because generally if somebody demolishes a heritage aspect, as we've seen at West Hobart and the garden in Sandy Bay, they're in trouble because they have demolished something in a heritage precinct or even a heritage property. The word demolish probably wasn't right in my original talking piece back on the 7th of July. Yes, 7th of July. But it is the issue of you're taking something of heritage value that's been of heritage value for 120 years and putting we don't quite know where. If it was to be put down at Macquarie Point or Narina or St David's Park, Crowther is still around. So if he's going to be around, should he not stay with the plinth that tells his story and possibly using the 3 vacant plinths to tell the broader story of what he did during his time in this community?
Further questions? Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Merigi. What's your view on what impact the removal of the statue would have on the heritage value of Franklin Square? How important is the statue to Franklin Square in your opinion?
Well, I suppose I look at it as a heritage, most significant. It's in the midst of, almost the midst of, the most significant collection of heritage buildings in the entire country of Australia, possibly the most significant out of the UK of our architectural period. And to leave, I understand why the plinth's being left there, because it will help to tell the stories, and I'm quite comfortable with that. But I think to actually take down a person, I don't really, it's all part of the significant flow of the heritage precinct in which it sits. It's going to stand like someone's just taken out one of your eye teeth and you don't look right, your face doesn't look balanced. We already have another statue there. the physical fact of taking it away, I believe, as it said, as the Lord Mayor wrote, it doesn't. Relocating the statue doesn't change history. The records, the books, the articles, dates and stories associated with the statue will all remain unchanged. So my application, plea to the council is to leave Crowther there. He can be looked at as the people saw him 120 years ago. He can be looked at as the Aboriginal descendants feel about him today. And he wasn't put there just because it was sponsored by McDonald's. It was everybody, not everybody, but even the convicts would be putting sixpence towards the appeal, which was quite a lot of money to them. He was such an important man in this town. He did do wonderful works. He, like so many other people around the world, was interested in the, I can't think of the correct adjective that the Lord Mayor uses, phrenology, but
Mr. Merridew, can we try and keep...
around the world, he was just...
Mr. Merridew, can we just try and keep the answers? We can't have like 5-minute answers to every question. So I appreciate this is a passionate issue, but we need to not have this drag on for until midnight. Did you want to wrap that up really, really quickly and then we'll move... Or did... No? Okay.
Well, did Alderman Dutta have a second question?
Well, yeah, Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. The second question that I have for you is this, that have you read the report that has come out, and would you agree that the Tasmanian Heritage Council has given the approval for the removal of the statue?
Could you quote to me the actual words that the Tasmanian Heritage Council wrote? I think it was about 4 lines, the phraseology, because I thought it related more to the cultural aspect than the physical heritage aspect. Would that be correct?
Oh, this isn't a debate. This is just questions, so it's not both ways, but I'm sure we'll have that particular point come out later in debate. Councillor Sherlock.
Chair. Thank you, Chris, for your deputation. I'm just wondering if you, with regards to the heritage impact statement that Purcell wrote, and it's in the planning committee here, I'm just wondering, just with regards to what you've said and what is said here, and I'll just read it to you. I'd like to. The removal of the Crowther statue with retention of the Crowther plinth will contribute to the cultural significance, character and appearance of Franklin Square and its setting. The Crowther statue is a non-significant item with contemporary social associations that are divisive and derogatory to the Tasmanian Aboriginals. The Crowther statue does not contribute to the cultural significance nor values of Franklin Square.
That's the opinion of... No, I'm sorry, I've been interstate since the...
As a guy, I don't need further elaboration.
Question.
The question was if you agreed with that or not, because you referenced that there was significance of the statue.
I referenced the significance of the statue as part of the entire heritage complex, starting at TMAG or the Bond Store, going right through to beyond Collegiate School. This is in the middle of a very significant heritage area. Taking the statue down, as the Lord Mayor wrote, it makes no...
Yeah, look, I understood what you said. My point, my question was with regards to it, the removal of the Crowther statue does not contribute, the Crowther statue does not contribute to the cultural significance nor values of Franklin Square.
That wasn't the opinion I wrote. No.
Can we keep these questions through the chair? And it's not a debate either.
It's okay. I understand that you probably can't answer it. It's all right. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Mr. Merridew, I recognise your interest in Hobart, in all things Hobart, and thanks for coming in for your deputation this evening. Do you have any qualifications in heritage or history?
My qualification, like so many people, is from experience.
Sorry, do you have any formal?
Can we let? Sorry.
No,
Just
no.
can we let Mr. Merridew answer his question, and we can ask follow-ups after.
There is a thing called a qualification called experience, and I have been involved and had a strong interest in heritage in this city for 40 years, and I was the trustee on the National Trust Preservation Trust, Hobart, of which Alderman Barry Fisher represented the Hobart City Council on that, and I think we all respect Alderman Barry Fisher's extreme knowledge of the city. I gained a lot from him, and I am in a position where I hear a lot of people's opinion about many things in the city, and the Treasury buildings was a simple example. It was a 3-year campaign supported, which we won by logical argument.
Are there any other questions? If not, thank you, Mr. Merridew. Thank you for your contribution. We'll move on to Jocelyn McPhee.
Mr. Chairman, just once...
No, sorry, it's not.
I was trying to make a statement about the health issues, and unfortunately we were both speaking at the same time.
Yeah, Mr. Merridew, yeah, we're not. It's not the nature of this this committee to continue on. Thank you, Mrs. McPhee. Yeah, if you just want to bring that microphone as close as you can, we'll give you 5 minutes to speak. I'll give you a reminder at 30 seconds, and then we'll have some questions for you. So free to start whenever you're ready.
Thanks very much. My name's Jocelyn McPhee, and I'm I'm speaking on behalf of the Royal Society of Tasmania in support of the planning application being considered. The Society also supported the Council's decision a year ago to remove the Crowther statue, a statue that's been identified as culturally unsafe at least since 2015. The case for approval of the application is a very strong one. Approvals recommended by the Council Planners Report, the Heritage Impact Assessment, and the Tasmanian Heritage Council. And according to the external heritage expert, the application is compliant with the Sullivan's Cove planning scheme. Nevertheless, there were 23 objections. Most of them were in fact objections to the removal of the statue, but important concerns relevant to planning were raised, and I want to comment on 3 of those. The first is that the process leading to approval of the addendum to the Franklin Square Conservation Plan was in some way flawed. However, consideration of the addendum followed the same steps as those used for the original plan. So if the process was flawed for the addendum, then it was also flawed for the plan, and for all other plans prepared following the same pattern. Further, it was made perfectly clear from the outset that the addendum was a prerequisite for approval of this application, and a great deal of time and effort and money would have been wasted if the addendum was not in place first. The second concern is this application threatens Tasmania's cultural heritage. These objections reflect the compelling connections that may exist between humans and certain places or objects. We accept such connections readily when the place is ours, somewhere familiar. Indeed, the 2007 plan for Franklin Square takes as its starting point British occupation. The statement of cultural significance begins, Franklin Square has a direct association with colonial Hobart. The square is located on the area occupied in the first days of the settlement. Excuse me. The point is that the perspective of cultural significance offered in the plan and discussed in the objections is in fact the inherited colonial perspective. There's a real risk here that the contemporary Palawa voice at the heart of this whole exercise could be drowned out by the noise of arguments over colonial cultural heritage. The third concern is the evidence that Crowther wasn't the only prominent citizen involved in procuring Palawa bodies for their skeletons and skulls, and that he is being unfairly picked on. The focus on Crowther derives from the dispute over Lanny's body becoming public and thus part of known history. The other perpetrators must have been more skilled at keeping their activities quiet. Whatever the reason, does the fact that there were others change anything? It does not reduce the negative connotations of the Crowther statue. It does not lessen the pain and trauma suffered by Tasmanian Aboriginal people at the time and inherited by the current Palawa community. And it does not invalidate the Council's attempt at truth-telling and recognition. In fact, if anything, it makes removing the statue even more important, a symbol of new awareness and willingness to listen to Tasmanian Aboriginal voices. And it means also that there's more work to be done. If the other culprits have been honoured by monuments, they should be similarly reassessed. In conclusion, what is at stake here is not just the removal of a culturally unsafe statue. It is this: having heard the voice of Tasmanian Aboriginal people, will the Council now act appropriately?
Thank you. Under time. Are there any questions? Councillor Elliott. And then Councillor Lohberger. So you can see there.
You mentioned there about there being other perpetrators, and I just wanted to confirm that you are aware that members of the Royal Society were other perpetrators, including Dr. Stokel, who took Lanny's hands and feet.
Yes, they were right there in the centre
thick
of
of it.
the action.
Yep.
Many of those members were surgeons, so they had ready access to the hospital and to the morgue.
Yes, thank you. And one second question. What's your thoughts on, this is going to set a powerful precedent, and you've talked about that other monuments should also be assessed. And you've stated your obvious support for the removal of the Dr. Crowther statue. And only a few metres away we have the statue of John Franklin, who was very actively involved in bone collecting also. What's your views on the precedent and where this snowballing removal of statues should end? Is there an end in sight, or?
Point of order, Chairman. Point of order.
Yep.
This is not relevant to what we're considering tonight. So I wish you that you rule on this point of order.
Thank you, Deputy. Look, as I said at the beginning, I think it is important that we do keep things to the application in front of us. I know that it is those conversations have been, we've had these conversations over the periods, but can we keep it relevant to this application, please?
I'll reframe the question.
Thank you.
Do you see that this application, when it passes and the statue is removed, setting a precedent that could have some unintended consequences for our valuable heritage?
I think we need to take each of these cases separately and consider the evidence that we have and to make decisions that are consistent with that evidence. So if removing the Crowther statue eventually leads to further statues being assessed similarly, that's an appropriate outcome.
Councillor Lohberger.
Thank you, Chair. Just through you. There's been a bit of debate in this place, but not tonight, about whether or not Crowther actually stole the skull of William Lanny. What's your opinion and the opinion of the Royal Society on that?
Look, I might just jump in because I think it's very similar to the last question. We do need to keep things relevant to the development application in front of us, and I'm just not sure. I think that's going down a rabbit hole that gets too far away from the application that we've got in front of us. Appreciate the question, but I'd ask that we keep it in regards to the application that we've got. Did you have another question, or Lord Mayor?
Thank you, Jocelyn. Two questions just around, can I just be reminded of the process that the Royal Society, well, one, has the Royal Society issued its own sort of apology to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community, and when did you do that? And what was the process you went through for the Royal Society to make a decision about supporting the removal of the Crowther statue? And just a final one is, did you put in a submission on the addendum? Did the Royal Society put it? Yeah.
I'll have a go at remembering those, but
Yeah,
I'll
I can
probably
remind
need to
you.
be reminded.
Yeah.
The first one, yes, in February 2021, the Royal Society offered a formal apology to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community in view of actions by members of the Society during the 1800s, but well into the 1900s as well. And I'm here tonight because as part of that apology, we committed to trying to build a more respectful and sensitive awareness of Tasmanian Aboriginal culture. And your second question,
was, what process did you go through as a society to reach the position on Crowther?
On the position on Crowther?
On the Crowther statue.
Right. So this came up towards the middle of last year. As President, I was approached directly by the Council to comment on the Crowther reinterpreted project, and the way the Royal Society operates is that we have a kind of a governing council that is the leadership body for the members, and the governing council considered all the information provided about the Crowther reinterpreted project and decided by a majority vote that we would support the council's removal of that statue. And then more recently, in relation to this next stage of the project, the planning application and its approval, we went through the same process, and the council, by an even greater majority, approved that I would give a representation and a deputation. And the last
the last
question,
one was just whether you'd put in something on the addendum.
No, didn't.
Any other questions? Okay, I've got Councillor Kelly, I think, got the jump, and then Alderman Bloomfield.
Did you reference the Borough Charter?
No.
Did you reference the protection of Australia's commemorative places and monuments from the heritage in Commonwealth government? No?
But these are all referenced in those documents I did cite, such as the heritage impact assessment and the assessment by the expert on heritage, Professor Mackay.
Thank you.
Alderman Bloomfield.
Through you. When it came to all of what we've been dealing with, I see that there are two issues here. One is that we need to address the removal of the statue, but the second part, according to this planning scheme, is that we also need to look forwards, and I'd like to focus on how we look forwards. How do you see that? How do you see the next stage of that we must replace it with something? What do you see? What is your idea of that? Because to remove it, we actually have to have something to replace it with. So it's a twofold understanding. How do you see that we should go forwards with that? What was your idea of that?
The Society considered the proposal presented by the Council, and that was that the statue would be removed, the plinth would remain, and there would be interpretive panels. And that seems to be an entirely sensible way to direct community discussion and interest to the history behind the empty plinth. So this isn't this isn't a subject that we have an independent view on. We've taken the advice, very thoroughly considered advice that the council has, or plan that the council has come up with about how to deal with that empty plinth.
Any other questions? No. Oh, Councillor Lohberger.
I'll just try and re-ask that question in a way that's appropriate to this this process. The planning documents note that the history of Crowther and Lanny is contested. What is the Royal Society's view on that history of what actually happened?
That's right. Well, the records that we have access to are largely in the public domain, so papers by Stefan Petro, for example, and the recent work by Professor Pybus that's come to light. But there's also been a report by Reby Taylor and Zoe Rimmer that was published in the Papers and Proceedings of the Royal Society of Tasmania last year. All of these provide different perspectives of that episode between Lanny and Crowther, but it wasn't just between Lanny and Crowther, it was between Lanny, Crowther and 3 or 4 other people. And you're right that in fact there was never proof, but if we go with the weight of evidence, it very strongly implicates Crowther as being responsible. And it almost doesn't matter because there are a lot of others doing the same thing.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Other questions? No. Thank you for your time. If you want to take your seat again, we'll move on to Ms. Sharkey and Ms. Burke-Smith from Irene Inc., representing the applicant being counsel on this. Welcome. If you just want to bring those microphones as close as they'll allow. You'll have 5 minutes. We'll give you a warning at 30 seconds left, and I'm sure we'll have some questions for you. So.
Thank you. My name is Poppy Sharkey. I'm from Irene Inc. Planning and Urban Design. Irene Inc. alongside Purcell were engaged by council in its role as landlord to prepare and submit a planning application on council's behalf. The application is for the removal of the bronze statue of William Crowther from Franklin Square, the retention of the sandstone plinth, and for the temporary interpretive signage. The landlord decision to remove the Crowther statue was deliberated on by council in August 2022. Following consultation and input from the community that was undertaken over a 10-month period, it was found the majority were in favour of the removal. Consequently, council passed a motion supporting the removal of the statue subject to planning approval. The planning application has been assessed for compliance under the Sullivan's Cove Planning Scheme 1997. There are 3 key discretions for the Planning Authority to consider. The first relates to Schedule 1, Conservation of Cultural Heritage Values. The application is in accordance with the Franklin Square Conservation Management Plan and supported by a Heritage Impact Assessment undertaken by Heritage Consultant Lucy Burke-Smith of Purcell. Lucy will later explain the heritage analysis. The second relates to Schedule 4, the sign schedule. The temporary signage, and I will just also add that it is not going to be fixed to the plinth, it's temporary, freestanding, is supported by the Heritage Impact Assessment, and it will not detract from the significance of Franklin Square and provides a positive interpretation of the place. The third and final discretion relates to Schedule 7, demolition. The removal of the statue will not impact on the character of the activity area, result in a vacant site, or detract from the cultural heritage values of the Cove. With respect to these 3 key discretions, the proposal is found to comply with the scheme. In the course of advertising, 35 representations were received, 10 for, 23 against, and 2 neutral. The Council, as Planning Authority, has undertaken an assessment and has made recommendation for approval. This is supported by the recommendation of Independent Heritage Consultant, Professor Richard Mackay. The representations received were considered as part of this assessment. In addition, the Tasmanian Heritage Council has also approved the application. All of these separate independent assessments have found that the removal of the statue will not have a detrimental impact on the character of the area or the heritage values of Franklin Square. The proposal will enhance the role of Franklin Square as a place for people in alignment with the expressed community sentiments and consistent with the strategic values of the Sullivan's Cove Planning Scheme. I'll now hand over to Lucy.
Thank you, Poppy. My name is Lucy Burke-Smith. I'm a registered architect with postgraduate qualifications in heritage conservation. I have 20 years' experience in this field and am currently Associate Partner for Purcell, an international architecture and heritage consultancy practice. My work extends to the role of conservation architect and heritage consultant for state and Commonwealth government agencies responsible for the care, conservation of state, national and world heritage places. It is the finding of Purcell's Heritage Impact Assessment that the removal of the bronze and associated works will not impact the significance of Franklin Square and complies with the requirements of the Sullivan's Cove Planning Scheme. This follows an assessment of the monument in accordance with the Tasmanian Heritage Council publication assessing historic heritage significance, in which Purcell found that the monument is not of historic cultural heritage significance and does not make an essential contribution to the significance and values of Franklin Square. Council's independent assessor, as Poppy has mentioned, has made recommendation for approval subject to conditions, and I also note that the Tasmanian Heritage Council have approved the application. It is important to stress that the findings of the Heritage Impact Assessment are particular to the place and the proposal and have been done within the framework of principles and guidelines recognised and applied as best practice within the profession. Every proposal needs to be assessed on a case-by-case basis, and indeed the conclusion may have been different were the context different. In this respect, the proposal does not risk establishment of a precedent. I recognise Professor Mackay's position that consideration be given to the deferral of the application to enable further research. Further research is likely to be contested, and, notwithstanding the findings of any further research, the assessment of the monument's significance would not likely change when considered against the Tasmanian Heritage Council framework for assessing significance. The question here is not if the monument has any intrinsic value, but what value it contributes to Franklin Square. As the removal of the statue will not impact the values and significance of Franklin Square and complies with the Sullivan's Cove Planning Scheme, we therefore have made recommendation for approval.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I'm sure there will be. I've got Councillor Sherlock and then Councillor Dada.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for your deputation. You noted before that it does not establish a precedent.
The assessment needs to understand what the impact of any proposal is to the significance of a place. And so if a particular element or component of a place has a direct contribution to the significance of a place, it can be inferred that impact to that element or fabric would therefore impact the significance and the values. And therefore there's a direct correlation here between the assessed significance of the Crowther Monument and the independently the significance of Franklin Square. And so the values and significance of Franklin Square remain embodied in the place, even in the event of the removal of the bronze.
Councillor Dada.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I want to ask you the same question that I asked Chris Meridew, and the question is whether there are cultural heritage value to the Crowther statue. I note you made some statement, but I do want a clear, definitive answer. Thank you.
Our Conservation Plan Addendum assessed the significance of the Crowther Monument against the Tasmanian Heritage Council publication for assessing significance, and it was found against the very rigorous framework of considerations, thresholds for inclusion and exclusion, that the Crowther Monument is not of significance.
Thank you.
Further questions? I've got Councillor Kelly, Deputy Lord Mayor, Alderman Bloomfield.
Did you reference the Borough Charter?
Yes.
And you didn't think that was what they recommended in there as appropriate?
I think you'll find that the Heritage Impact Assessment calls up a few references to the Borough Charter, and some of those are recognising that significance changes over time, and that impacts need to be considered in context. And so in that respect, I'm comfortable that our referencing of the Borough Charter is applicable and sound.
That's more of your opinion, though, on the matter.
That's my professional
That's
opinion
your
on the
opinion,
matter.
okay. And the Australian Heritage Council's protection of Australia's commemorative places and monuments in Australia, you looked at that in depth?
Was this the Commonwealth Guide you were mentioning?
The Australian, which was made by the Australian Heritage Council, commissioned by the Commonwealth Government.
I don't consider that that's relevant to this application.
Well, reading it, it goes exactly into these examples of removing.
The Franklin
statues.
Square is a state and a locally listed place, and the statutory framework within which an application needs to be considered is relevant to those local and state planning provisions, and we have applied the best practice guides that we consider appropriate to those planning provisions in our assessment.
Was that the Heritage Council's report?
Sorry,
tap deeply into
sorry,
it, so you didn't reference that.
sorry, Councillor Kelly.
Question.
Councillor Kelly, we'll keep it as a question and answer, not debate at this stage. Jeff,
one other question,
yep.
if I may. Did you speak to the original author of the conservation plan, the previous one?
The opportunity wasn't extended to do so.
Is it normal practice to do that, though?
If the author and the client or owner of the conservation plan mutually facilitate to do so, but I think it's also important to note that Council did afford the opportunity for that author to undertake the addendum, and they declined.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Deputy Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Thank you for your report. I have two questions. The Tasmanian Heritage Council has, in their conditions, suggested that the statue, should it be the removal be approved tonight, be stored and not taken out of storage until it is approved by that. Do you feel that that's possible to store a bronze statue safely, effectively?
Yes. Our Heritage Impact Assessment also makes recommendations that methodologies to do that are developed, and so that in the event that the statue is removed, prior to its removal, there's a very rigorous framework within which that's done to ensure as least possible harm to the bronze itself, and to ensure that the storage methodology and continued maintenance of that element is ensured.
Yep, thank you. Okay, so that's something that can be conditioned and effective.
Yes.
Yep. My second question, if I may, Chair, is really about the context of this specific question, this item before us, and I just wonder, do you see this as a watershed moment in interpretation of cultural values?
I can understand why there may be some public perception that it presents as a watershed moment. As a professional, I also understand that it's of interest to the profession, which is also the case internationally as people are considering these matters. I would, however, like to refer back to the point that I made, that I feel that the proposal does not risk the establishment of a precedent, in that if a particular monument had a direct association with a place, it would be much more difficult to argue the case for its removal because of the inherent links between its significance and association and the resulting impacts of a removal. That said, every application needs to be given due merit and thorough consideration, and these, while there's a very strong framework for making these decisions, they are still, difficult and complex decisions to work through and to.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you. I've got Alderman Bloomfield and then the Lord Mayor.
I was interested to note that I'm focusing more on the replacement temporary installation. And that is that you mentioned that it has a positive interpretation. Now, I'm assuming these are the ways of interpretation along with why the empty plinth on the Rio. Well, I'm assuming it's a structure that's like Rio. How is this a positive interpretation? It doesn't. I'm really looking forward at the moment to see how I explain this. I see that we have two cultures that are struggling to deal with this issue. It's profoundly painful on both sides. And I wish very much to see that we go forwards in a way that stops this.
Is there a question here, Alderman Bloomfield?
The question is, I'm not entirely convinced. How do you see this as being something that's positive to do to allow the community to walk forwards well? This is really the whole point, isn't it? Is that we're actually doing this alteration to heal the community. Do you see that as doing this?
That is a temporary sign and the beginnings of further stages that would look to interpret the monument and its context and history, which has been beyond the scope of our assessment.
Lord Mayor.
Yes. Two questions. The first one is just, did the Heritage Council assess the addendum, the Conservation Management Plan addendum? Do they have to look at that as well?
I'm unable to.
Okay. No, I'll ask someone else. But they obviously looked at the planning application.
I presume the conservation addendum, and I could be corrected, has been provided as part of the application to Heritage Tasmania. But
the other one is just around this issue of precedent, and there's a lot of some ways hyperbole, it seems, about that this is going to you give people one thing and they'll want to knock down Parliament House, or people talking about precedents. But I guess Franklin is the main one that people are thinking about because of some suggestion that his wife was involved in the same business. I mean, what's the difference between the Crowther significance to Franklin Square and the Franklin significance to Franklin Square? I presume it's chalk and cheese, but is that what you would see?
Look, it's. I suppose, yeah. Answer the question, but I hope that we can.
Oh,
yeah.
I don't.
So Franklin Square.
Because you haven't done. I understand you
I
haven't done a
an
proper
assessment
yet.
but I guess in response to, and I'll keep this very brief. Franklin Square obviously has a much more intrinsic association with the Franklin Square. Franklin himself has a much more intrinsic association with Franklin Square.
Yeah.
Franklin's statue is central to the planning, the design and the establishment of the park, and by association he is Franklin himself and the fountain and the bronze of Franklin in the centre of the park contributes directly to the significance and values of the place.
Oh, thank you.
Further questions? I did have a couple myself. You did mention in the in your deputation that further research on this matter would be contested. In what manner do you think it would be contested, and would that fact itself not potentially call for the need for some further research?
I think I'm not a historian. That said, I dare say that regardless the evidence, regardless the research, regardless the positioning, there are always going to be two sides to some of these narratives that are not definitively proved, and I don't think that that's limited to this matter.
Thank you. No other questions?
Sorry.
Oh, Lord Mayor.
Is it possible just to comment more broadly on to what extent your colleagues in the profession, like around ICOMOS and heritage consultants, how much of is this quite a big issue that is being discussed in the, like I know ICOMOS is meeting in Australia next week. Is this
Lord Mayor, once again,
okay.
sorry, but we do need, this is really venturing into like broad political issues and not the application. Are there any other questions relative to the application we have? No. Thank you for your time. There we go. So we do have, I'll open the item. We do have Professor Mackay here, who consulted with council on this application, who will be available to take. Well, I might invite you up to the table yourself, Professor. But I'll open the item. Who would like to kick things off? Deputy, and then Councillor Harvey.
Chair, I'll move the application as it is for approval. What we have here tonight is an application for simply, like if you just bring it down to its bare bones, it's the looking at the performance criteria of heritage, demolition and placement of a temporary sign. Now, I know that there is obviously more to this application than what other than just those elements to it. We've had significant debate, quite terse and sometimes really unpleasant public debate and social media debate on this issue, but tonight we're acting as a planning authority, and for me that's what it drills down to. We've heard and I've read all the representations, and in some ways what that does for any consideration is looking at the Sullivan's Cove planning scheme of 1997. We have differing opinions and different interpretations of that planning scheme and those elements to it. But to my mind, the Purcell report suggests that the Crowther monument is not inherent to the values of Franklin Square, and I think that's one of the most important things to consider tonight. And looking at those, the application we have before us, we have the criteria, and I think in all elements, and I know that Professor Mackay has had specific reference to technically these elements are met, but all of the elements of heritage, demolition and signage, temporary signage, is met. I think the other thing which is teased out here with the deputations tonight is that in some ways this is an interesting time in history because of how we interpret history and the cultural relevance with reference to not only why this was first erected as a statue, but also the cultural relevance of a systematised racism that may have occurred or has occurred throughout Tasmanian history. So it is an interpretation of culture and cultural heritage that is considered tonight and cannot really be separated from the Crowther statue.
Okay, I've got Councillor Harvey, and then I've got Councillor Elliott, and then...
Yeah, thank you, Chair. All the way through this process, we've had the highest level of expertise and research and support for the removal of the statue. Tonight, we know, we understand, we've got the Tasmanian Heritage Council who support our application, the council's application. We've got independent heritage council people who have supported the removal of the statue. The officer's recommendation, of course, is for removal, and the Royal Society of Tasmania, who I hold in high esteem, also have supported the removal of the statue. This is the final process in what's been a really long and fascinating and interesting process, regardless of some of the unsavoury remarks that have been made, which I think have been appalling. But the decision tonight is to remove the statue. All the way through the process, it's been a very interesting and educational process, a culturally significant process for all of Hobart and all those people involved. And the recognition this also gives to the First Nations people of Tasmania, I think is exceptionally important. So tonight I have no hesitation in supporting the removal of the statute for all those reasons. It's had support all the way through. The process has been very detailed and thorough. So I have no hesitation in supporting the recommendation tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Elliott, and then I've got Councillor Dada.
Thank you. I have a few questions first, please, through you, Chair, likely to the Director. The reports talk about management strategies that should include public access being maintained, such as through a permanent display in another location or manage public access. Are we at a point where we're able to provide that at the moment?
Through you, Chair, no, we're not. This is very much an interim step, as in the removal is being contemplated, and then if this is approved tonight, there'll be some subsequent arrangements made to ensure that the requirements of the Heritage Impact Assessment and also the THC conditions are able to be complied with.
Right, so the intention is that public access will be provided?
Through you, Chair, yes, that's my understanding.
That's good to hear at least. The report states that the statue would be deacquisition to a government agency for retention and conservation. Is that another thing that would happen undoubtedly, or is that something that could fall by the wayside?
Through you, Chair, a key step is a proposed condition by the THC that the details of the storage location must be provided to and be to the satisfaction of the Heritage Tasmania's Works Manager. So we can't really make any comment at the moment because those details would need to be finalised at a later point.
Right, okay. And then finally, just in terms of the questions, what is the appropriate storage? Where is the statue going to go when it's removed?
Chair, I just really need to repeat my earlier answer. Those details have not been finalised by the applicant team and would be subject to satisfaction of the THC. Okay, and does that,
would that, the storage home of the statue, would that come back to council, or is that just a matter for officers to resolve?
Through you, Chair, the current proposal for the conditions is that the oversight body would be the THC.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thanks. So my comments are going to focus on the cultural heritage side of things of the statue itself and the signage. I'm less concerned about the demolition. I'm pleased to see that there's archaeologist involvement in that. But from my perspective, what the application actually puts forward is nonsensical. If the Crowther statue is so offensive to members of the community, I really don't understand why the sandstone plinth would remain, especially with it engraved with the Dr. Crowther's name and the community's thanks to him. To me, the only explanation is that it's because without the plinth being there, there's nothing to draw attention to the statue's removal. It's more powerful for the plinth to remain, so that it can be showcased as a virtuous, headline-grabbing, empty plinth. The Crowther statue is highly valuable and significant heritage artefact. Up until this year, that was known and agreed. The Franklin Square Conservation Plan of 2007 stated that the statue was of high significance, and it was interesting to note that the author of that report actually declined to do the update, and I suspect I could guess why they declined. The statue has been a constant in Franklin Square since it was erected in 1889. It was funded by the people of Hobart, not the government and certainly not this council. It is artistically beautiful and was shipped from London to Hobart free of charge as a sign of respect to Dr. Crowther, who was adored for his generosity and kindness. Reading the historical records, which I've done at length, the love the community had for the grand old doctor is palpable. The people who adored him paid for this statue with the clear intention that it would remain in place as an enduring memorial for generations. This application shows complete disrespect and disregard to their wishes. The cultural value of the statue is immense. It captures a snippet of our history. It provokes deeper thinking, including about how times and values have changed. We should not be jumping to removal. The documents before us state that coexistence of cultural values should be further explored. They also state that truth-telling is based on truth and therefore additional research to enable a definitive understanding of Crowther and related historical events is warranted. Despite these statements, the application has been put forward for approval. This is not a reflection on the professionalism of the report's authors. but in my opinion, the reports this information has been based on is heavily skewed and biased. These reports are simply part of getting ducks in a row to facilitate a predetermined decision. Given the magnitude of what's at stake and the precedent of the statute's
Point of order,
removal,
Chair. The decision that was offensive to me personally.
given the magnitude of what's at stake...
You need to make a ruling.
Under section 23(1)(d), thank you. You know, the fact that it was predetermined, I mean, it wasn't predetermined in my view when I sit in this council.
Look,
I find that offensive.
I don't think that was a personal attack on anybody. I won't accept that, but I will ask that we do stick to the application.
It was, yeah, okay. It's about the reports. Given the magnitude of what's at stake and the precedent of the statute's removal, it's disturbing to read in the reports that only desk-based research and client-provided information has been considered, no new archival research undertaken. The reports state that the statue is a non-significant item with contemporary associations that are divisive and derogatory to Tasmanian Aboriginals. This is a false and misleading statement. The truth is that some Aboriginal people are offended by the statue. Are they also offended by the Franklin statue that's only metres away? And the reports also state that the removal of the Crowther statue will enhance the values of Franklin Square. To me, that's very perplexing. How does inconsistently removing one man's statue enhance its values? As I've said, what about the John Franklin Square? He and his wife Jane were big collectors. It was normalised behaviour then. When will the Franklin Square stop becoming Franklin Square? That's the pathway that this council has set our community on, and most Tasmanians are very unhappy about it. I strongly disagree that the statue does not make an essential contribution to Franklin Square. It is the statues of Franklin Square that make it Franklin Square. Otherwise, it's just a garden. The reports talk about Franklin Square having significance due to its continuity of use and continuity of presence. And that's right, the statue has stood for 134 years and was intended to remain as a constant. The report states that the statue would be deacquisitioned by a government agency for retention and conservation. It's a shame that we don't have those next steps before us for consideration. For me, unless this whole, this application would have been much more palatable if we had known that the statue was being moved to TMAG, Narinya, rather than sent into some unknown place of darkness. The fact that this application is coming to us with no recommendation of an alternative location is a real shame. This report also talks about changes requiring not reducing the authenticity of the place. In my mind, removing the statue completely destroys the authenticity of the memorial itself and Franklin Square. Removing it intentionally rips out its authenticity. The people of 1889 paid for the statue, not a plinth. Sadly, I can see that the Crowther statue not being listed as a heritage item in its own right, rather as part of Franklin Square, has made the statue much more vulnerable. I guess no one in their right mind would have thought that we'd be tearing down statues, but here we are. And when it comes to the signage in the application is garish. It's insensitive and overpowering, and it's clearly designed to say, look over here, look what we've done, look how virtuous we are. The signage is very dominant.
Point of order, Chairman. This is totally irrelevant and offensive, the way that Councillor Elliott is suggesting that what Council is doing is virtue signalling. So I would like that withdrawn.
Oh, look, I'll draw Councillor Elliott back to the application. I didn't hear anything in there that was aimed at being offensive to anyone. So look, I'll draw it back to the.
I'm specifically talking about the signage, specifically on the application, and it's a discretionary. Well, we all have our own judgments. I'm sharing my judgment, which I'm allowed to do. This signage.
Point of order, Chair. Points of order are to be ruled on without commentary by members.
That's part of my debate.
That is okay. Yeah, that is correct.
The signage is very, very dominant. It's overbearing and completely unsympathetic to the setting. It will be a major detractor to what is an otherwise elegant space. The works are also required to not be individually prominent. The removal of the statue will be very prominent, and as will this signage. I disagree with the use of galvanised fencing and confused as to why this has been recommended. It's like we want the Franklin Square to look like a construction zone with people looking out for high vis. The scale of the signage is over the top at 2 metres by 2.4 metres in size. It's attention-seeking overkill. The signage is intentionally designed to be a distraction, to capture attention and not provide fair and impartial information. It's a political statement. When it comes to the text on the actual sign, it talks about the stages that the council has gone through, but it doesn't actually answer the question as to why the statue is removed. That's what people will want to know. There should be an answer. Important context is also missing in the text, such as the artworks commissioned were from Tasmanian Aboriginal artists only and not a cross-section of the community, and that these artworks promoted significant errors that were paid for by the council. The sign being branded as Creative Hobart is probably fitting, as there's been a lot of creative licence applied to this exercise. In summary, I disagree with the recommendation to remove the statue, as the statue carries immense heritage value, and I concur with the view from 2007 that the statue is of high significance. I also find the signage to be highly inappropriate and a detractor to such a heritage location. I note that the report states that significance can change over time, and that cultural significance may change from time and use, and that cultural significance may change as a result of new information. That said, there's been no new information. There can't have been. William Crowther and the people who paid for this statue have been dead for 100 years. The statue of Dr. William Crowther is of high significance. It has considerable heritage value, and its removal will be a loss to the cultural setting and appearance of Franklin Square. I'm going to end on the only positive note of this application. This council's decision to remove the Dr. Crowther statue provides a tangible example of what's to come if the divisive and racist voice passes, and motivates even more people to vote no.
We've got a few people. I've got Councillor Dutta, Councillor Kelly, Councillor Lohberger, and then Councillor Sherlock. Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question through you to the relevant officer.
And upbring committee.
It's okay.
Okay.
I prefer to. The question is, during the engagement period, how many Aboriginal organisations and individuals responded and submitted, and how many opposed in favour, and how many were opposed to this?
Chair, the previous engagement was a landowner process, and that's not relevant to the planning authority's consideration of the planning application tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. For me, this is very interesting because when we first began this whole project in 2020, nearly 3 years ago, it went through a very rigorous process. Now, we've looked at the history of the whole, in the context of history, and as we all agree, historians differ in their opinions. Historians being biasness, there's sometimes different interpretations and different perspectives, etc., etc. But today, for us, it is not a historical perspective that we bring to this particular planning application. To this particular planning application, we look at the process. The process for me is that the application was made by the Hobart City Council to remove that statue. That's the process. The Hobart City Council had to then satisfy the provisions of the planning scheme. If today this is passed, under the process, there is still the right to appeal the decision in the tribunal. If the tribunal decision supports the council decision, if hypothetically it is voted for the recommendation to be removed, then there is another process to be challenged at the courts. So that's a process already in place. But for me, very simply, tonight, I have to look at, as a planning authority, the clauses in front of me to say, does it satisfy the provisions of the planning scheme? Clause 22.4.5, clause 25.9, clause 28.3, and clause 16. All these clauses, when you look at it, and put it under the provision to test it, it satisfies it without any doubt. The other very convincing argument here is this, that the Tasmanian Heritage Council have also approved it. They've looked at it and they've given their tick. So therefore, for me, tonight is simply to look at the planning scheme and the provisions, and for me it satisfies it. However, in conclusion, I will just make this statement. You know, structures are built, structures are destroyed. I've just come back from Fiji, and there were some very important buildings there that I valued when I grew up as a child. Those structures are now destroyed, but they don't destroy the memories I have of the place. The good deeds and the bad deeds are the ones that we will live with, and it will never be gone, as someone has said so rightly. So for me, I would support it because it satisfies all the planning provisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dutto. We've got Councillor Kelly next.
Thank you, Chair. Look, is there little wonder why the people of Hobart are disillusioned, confused and divided over the whole sorry Crowther statue debate? Consider the following. An expert report that gives the statue a high significance heritage status at one moment, and then another expert report a few years later that decrees that the same statue is of no cultural significance. A council and Heritage Tasmania decision that decides that the top half of the monument is offensive and should be removed, and the same decision that says the bottom half, the plinth, complete with details, is not and should remain. An expert report that says Franklin Square is a significant and important cultural space, and on the same site a Bunnings mesh builder's fence 2 metres high by 2.5 metres wide with interpretation, concreted into a hole that requires an archaeologist to supervise the excavation prior to a concrete base being poured, is appropriate. The owner of the Crowther statue, who during a planning application process assumes the role of judge, jury and executioner, who commissions conflicting reports, who promotes a historical narrative that in some areas is questionable, who has already made a formal decision to remove the statue and then comes back into the same chamber to vote on the same issue again, who has not only a perceived but a very real conflict of interest. The comprehensive document from the Australian Heritage Council's 2018 Protection of Australia's Commemorative Places and Monuments states that the addition of a new plaque does not edit history but adds to the story. Colonial monuments can be turned into points of reflection and tools for education instead of attempts to tidy up the past by their removal. No Australian wants to be told how they should think, and tonight's decision to remove Crowther's statue is that. I'm deeply saddened by the way the Tasmanian Aboriginal people have been treated, and I fully support the Crowther Reinterpreted initiative. Putting all that to one side, the current application proposed tonight must be considered under the relevant planning and heritage legislation, which is the Sullivan's Cove Planning Scheme 1997. All other considerations, opinions and decisions are, for the purposes of this application, irrelevant. By supporting the application to remove Crowther's statue, Council is not only creating a dangerous precedent, but is exposing itself to possibly losing an expensive and highly divisive appeal. However, the greatest loss is the legacy that this sorry saga leaves, the almost 3 years of bitter debate, the thousands of dollars that have been spent, a deeply divided community has been left, and the knock-on effect of stalling the reconciliation treaty process for potentially decades. The study to remove the statue is flawed because it makes no reference towards two very important documents that should have and could have been referenced. The Borough Charter, which is a set of principles that have been adopted to create accepted standard for heritage conservation practice. And two, the Commonwealth Government's 2018 Protection of Australia's Commemorative Places and Monuments. Furthermore, the author of the previous conservation plan who had stated that the Crowther statue had high heritage importance, was not even contacted. For me, the issue is not if Crowther was a good or bad person, but is because of the totally flawed, policy on the run, piecemeal approach to this highly divisive issue. I therefore cannot in all conscience support this application in its current form. Thank you.
Councillor Kelly, I've got Councillor Lohberger.
Thank you, Chair.
Well, I will just remind everybody we still have the opportunity for questions, and we still have Professor Mackay here who's sitting listening to debate as well.
Thank you for that, Chair. Look, I just wanted to commend everyone on the quality of the debate, the maturity of the debate so far in this room. There have been quite a few things said outside this room about the removal of this statue. Many of those comments have been unfair or incorrect, while many others can only be described as racist. It has been a very telling debate, and I do believe that some of the statue supporters have done themselves and our city no favours through the language that they have chosen to use. Look, I also believe that while many of the other colonial leaders at the time behaved terribly towards Indigenous Tasmanians, Crowther's desecration of William Lanny's body was one of the most hurtful and despicable acts of them all. And we as a council are trying to acknowledge that through this process. We cannot continue ignoring history, and that is exactly what this process is all about, accurately reflecting what happened to William Lanny, the man who is being forgotten in all of this. Finally, look, I'll just be quick here. The application satisfies the planning scheme requirements, and on that basis, I will be supporting it tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lohberger. I've got Councillor Sherlock next.
Oh yes, thank you very much, Chair. I actually just had a few questions with regards to some comments that were made by Councillor Elliott. Can you just, sorry, through to the director, is this galvanised fencing and signage, is this permanent or is it temporary?
Through the Chair, this is a temporary signage.
Great, excellent. Thank you for that. And then there was a comment made by Councillor Kelly just with regards to the Barra Charter. Can you just remind me, I think we heard in the deputation, is it correct that the Barra Charter was taken into account, for example, in the Purcell Heritage Impact Assessment?
Through your Chair, yes, that's my recollection of Ms Burke-Smith's comments.
Yes, wonderful, thank you very much. And further comments made by Councillor Kelly about councillors, judge, jury and executioner. Can you tell me, has there been other applications, planning applications, where council has decided on certain things with related to our land?
Through you, Chair, it's very common for the council to make applications on which relate to its own land. It's important to note that those applications always come to elected members. Officers don't have a delegation to determine those applications.
Great, thank you very much for that. And just one final thing that I'd like to ask. The 2018 Protection of Australia's Commemorative Places and Monuments that's been referenced, does that actually apply? Is the statue itself on the heritage list, the National Heritage List or Register?
Through you, Chair, my understanding from Ms Burke-Smith's response is that no, it doesn't apply.
Great, thank you very much for that. Much appreciated, thank you.
Councillor Alderman Bloomfield.
I had a couple of questions. Through you first, the plinth. My understanding, and I may be wrong, but my understanding is the plinth does actually have some historical significance because it actually is made of stone from an original building. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair, I might have to refer
I think it's somewhere in here, but I can't quickly find it for you, sorry. But I had a feeling that there was actually a direct connection, that's why the plinth wasn't being removed.
Through you, Chair, I might actually refer that one to Professor Mackay. I'm not sure whether he's able to assist with that issue.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Alderman. Look, I do not recall the reference to the stone plinth. My clear understanding from my review of the documents is that the point of retaining the plinth is as a device that identifies that the statue has been removed, is no longer there. The plinth sets out some information about Dr. William Crowther, and it's intended that the plinth be a focus for interpretation of the stories and narratives that relate to William Crowther. I'm not aware and do not recall any rationale that the plinth is being retained because the stone itself is important. Thank you, Chair.
The other question I had was, well, it was actually a question I had some months ago when we initially discussed this. No one has come back with the answer. We were told that these statues were common, but no one person has come back to tell me how many are in Tasmania. Do we have that answer yet?
Through you, Chair, my recollection from the materials is that there are two. I would stand to be corrected. Professor Mackay, I'm not sure whether you're able to assist with that one.
Through you, Chair, and thank you again for the question. My understanding is that there are two 19th century statues only remaining in Hobart. I can't speak for the whole of Tasmania, and both of them are in Franklin Square.
Okay, so look, the thing I find with all of this is the discussion, the pain, the hurt that I have watched both from the outside, before elected and now elected, to watch from the inside how horrific this has been for a journey for our community. We really need to put a door on this and move on. I also feel that this temporary structure, I feel, is not particularly sensitive on a number of issues. I completely disagree with Councillor Elliott's points being at virtual signalling and look at me and not necessarily, needs to explain. I don't think it's necessary to explain. In fact, I feel that if we continue this road, if we continue putting it out there, we are simply going to see more media, we're going to see more pain and more suffering that we simply don't need. We need to move on. We need to be focusing on what are we going to do next? What is the piece that is going to go there that is going to celebrate both communities and go forwards? Because honestly, I think that is the final point that we need to reach, and we need to be focusing there. Our time and energy needs to be there. Because at the end of the day, I had an email today asking for apologies, which our council, has the council apologised for any of the pain and suffering that has been supplied? I don't believe that's the case, is it? Has there been a formal apology made?
In regards to what?
In regards to the statue, in regards to some of the discourse that we've had recently.
As I said at the beginning of this, I think it's important that we stick to the actual application itself.
That's fine. I just feel that all of this reaches to this moment. So to be fair, if we're removing this, I think we would be better as a community to simply move on. And rather than establish yet another piece of what does he like to call it, a temporary signage, which is modern, it is not going to actually fit into the area. It simply adds more. For me personally, I see a community that has felt it has been relegated to being parts collectible. It's been relegated to not enough, and that is time enough to stop. Equally, we have a family whose only crime was to be born to it, and they also, I think, want to see this stuff stop, because every time they see the name Crowther, they know that's their relative. Both sides hurt. Both sides hurt immensely. So I would honestly like to put forward a move an amendment, and the amendment is to ask that the temporary signage is not approved tonight as part of this permit, so that it may not be installed, and that we move on and do good work to establish something wonderful, something strong that actually allows the community as a whole to move forward. Because I simply do not want to continue to see both sides continuing this aggravation of pain. It's enough. We've learnt, we've moved, we're growing. Let's just do that. So I don't know if I have a seconder, but
Yeah, it's committee. You don't need a seconder.
I don't need a seconder. Okay, thank you.
I'll just check on that. That's an appropriate amendment.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm comfortable that that can be imposed as a condition to as part of the approval.
Sorry, Chair, can I just get an understanding? What's the purpose of the temporary fencing? Is it to protect the site or to dominate that, like to provide something that indicates that something's happening there rather than just have an empty plinth? Is the temporary fencing going to have signage on it that explains this is a temporary fence?
Through you, Chair, I think it would be pretty obvious that it's a temporary fence.
Yeah.
And the content of the sign that has been proposed as part of the application clearly indicates that there's a further step to come which is yet to be properly designed or thought through. So it is very obvious that it will be a temporary step.
So I think the temporary fence is important in the interim until the final outcome is decided. So I'm happy to keep the temporary fence there.
Okay. Who's next? Lord Mayor.
I'll just ask a question on this fence issue. Is the fence just through the process of the removal of the statue, or is it, like you're talking about cyclone fencing?
Through you, Chair. So the temporary sign.
Oh, sign. No, the people are talking. Yeah. But people are talking about a fence.
Through you, Chair. I think that's reference to the temporary sign, which is included in the application materials.
Okay. So there's no. Okay. Good. No, it's good to get clarity on that.
Who's next?
Okay. Who's next?
Councillor
Chair, if I may just assist the Chair, perhaps we can just vote on the amendment if no one has any further questions.
We have to do the amendment first.
You have to do the amendment first.
Yeah. No, but I'm saying I don't think I'm happy to hold my debate until after we've voted on the amendment.
Okay, I'll just remind we're in committee, so you can speak multiple times, and but yes, that's fine. If there's no more comment on the amendment, I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. Okay, show of hands. All those in favour.
Councillor Elliott, Alderman Bloomfield, Councillor Kelly, and the Chair, Alderman Barkas.
And against.
Silk, the Lord Mayor, Councillor Dutta, Councillor Lohberger, Councillor Sherlock, Councillor Harvey, and Deputy Lord Mayor.
Councillor?
Sorry, did you want to? No. Okay, sorry. So the other comment that was made was with regard to the non-government agency and that we don't have the steps in place at present. Can you explain to us why we, because Councillor Elliott noted that we don't have these steps. I was just wondering, what's the rationale behind that?
Sorry, are you referring to the THC?
Yeah, the oversight, and it's going to go into storage. Councillor Elliott referenced that it was going to go in storage somewhere, and why hadn't we got to that stage yet where we know where it's going? I don't mean to misquote her in any way. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that was my understanding of what she'd stated.
Through you, Chair. So the THC has provided conditions which form part of its consent to this application, and they clearly indicate that there will be a further step in terms of the THC works manager approving whatever's proposed in terms of a new location for the statue. So I understand there have been some discussions and contemplation by the applicant about what might happen next, but that really all falls by the wayside, and we have to have discussions with the THC about what would be appropriate.
Great, thank you very much for confirming that. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, there was another point I probably should have made earlier, and that's about our, what's the plan called? The Aboriginal Commitment and Action Plan, which was a fantastic document that the council put a huge effort into working through with the Indigenous community, and part of that talks about truth telling, and this was a commitment we made 3 years ago to do with the crowd to tell the truth about the crowd of the statue. So it's really good to see that we've also met most of the commitments that we made in that strategy. So that's another important thing to highlight. We made this commitment a long time ago, and we're delivering on that commitment.
I see Councillor Basaldo. I've got a couple of questions myself first. Of the professor who's been waiting so patiently. Professor, on page 36 and 37 of your report, you did raise some concerns. First one, I'd just like to ask you about your reference to Article 13 of the Borough Charter that said coexistence of cultural values should always be recognised, respected and encouraged. This is especially important in cases where they can conflict. Can you just speak to that in the context of this application and the removal of the statue?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Chair. I'd preface my remark by just explaining that, in my view, the application clearly complies with the requirements of the Sullivan's Cove Planning Scheme 1997, and that compliance rests and requires the amendments that are made in the Conservation Plan addendum that was adopted by the Council in April. In the representations that were made in the application before the Planning Committee, the question was raised, should not that addendum have actually recognised the coexistence of different values in accordance with Article 13 of the Borough Charter, rather than saying we will replace one set of values being Eurocentric values associated with the art and the history of the statue with the negative values that reflect what is now understood about William Crowther and his involvement in the desecration of human Aboriginal remains. And I wanted to be careful to put before the Planning Committee as consent authority, this is a substantive issue that has been raised in the representations. My technical advice is very clearly that because of the content of that addendum, which is validly adopted by Council, this is a compliant application, but the potential to take an alternative route and recognise both sets of values and therefore have a different change to the conservation plan is also there and raised in the representations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And just a couple of follow-ons from that. And on the technical side of things, can you explain a bit? I know the answer to that is in the addendum, but from the perspective of planning and maintaining and preserving city's heritage through the scheme, it seems odd to me that we're in a situation where a statue erected in the 1800s that commemorates a historical figure that I think it needs to be said has significant heritage or has significant history in the context of the state. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation in the first place. Not all of that history is positive, of course. But how can we deem that such a statue doesn't have heritage significance, but the piece of stone that it sits on does?
Thank you, Chair. I might work backwards through your question, if I may. I don't think it's actually said that the plinth does and the statue that sits on top of it does not. What is presented in the Conservation Plan addendum is information about William Crowther that is additional to the information that was included in the 2007 Conservation Plan. The 2007 Conservation Plan does not go into a lot of detail about the Crowther statue or the monument, plinth and statue. It simply notes that it is part of the heritage item being the entirety of Franklin Square, and it provides in terms that the statues will be retained, conserved and managed. Therefore, without an addendum which allows their removal, it's fairly apparent that it would not be possible to give effect to Council's decision from August last year that the statue be removed. So in working through the implementation of the Council decision from August last year, the new information which is understood about about William Crowther, and therefore about the associations that contribute to the values, positive or negative, of the statue, were brought into play in the conservation plan. And it was council that adopted the original conservation plan and went through a process. It's appropriate that council adopted the addendum and went through the same process. And I have, after a lot of careful working through the detail and thought, formed the view it is a matter for council as the competent authority that lists the heritage item in the first place to determine what the conservation plan says, and it is similarly appropriate, therefore, in applying clause 22.4.5 of the scheme to have regard to what council itself has adopted in terms of the value of that statue.
Okay.
So that's why the compliance vests in the adoption of that conservation plan addendum. Thank you.
So
Thank you, Chair.
is the plinth still protected under heritage from being removed? Is it?
The plinth is actually part of the monument.
Yeah.
And there is in the documents, I think there is a fairly tight use of terminology: statue, plinth, and monument. The monument is everything together. The statue is the bronze bit on the top, and the plinth is the stone bit on the bottom. All of that is not a heritage item in itself. It never has been. It is part of Franklin Square, which is a heritage item, and the difference is, by adopting the conservation plan addendum, the contribution of that statue has been re-evaluated and changed, and the power has been created for the planning committee as the consent authority to make or not make the decision that's before you this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Professor. Councillor Basalt.
Thank you, Chair. This debate has taken place on Aboriginal land, and I'd like to recognise that, as well as recognising the Palawa Pakana people in the audience and watching online. Yapalingana to you. This issue has captivated our culture in Hobart for the last 3 or 4 years, and it's come to our final step as a planning committee. And throughout that time, we've heard from experts in heritage, history, culture, the British Society, the Tasmanian Aboriginal people here in Nipaluna, Hobart. And I thank them all for their contribution, particularly the experts who have provided me with the guidance from a heritage perspective and a planning perspective, because I'm just a community representative. And in reality, I know nothing about heritage. I know what I see, I know what's around me. But I am also a healthcare worker. I am a professional paramedic and a nurse. And what I do know is that well-being and the health of a community is being impacted by the statue remaining. The statue has very little well-being value to people in Hobart, but it is causing active harm to the Palawa people here in Nipaluna. And so for those reasons, I think that the heritage experts have said it's okay for the statue to be pulled down and be moved elsewhere. And the Tasmanian Aboriginal people have said this is one step towards making us feel better about what has occurred. One step towards truth. So I think that this is a really good step forward for healing in our community. So I will be supporting the removal of the Crowther statue, recognising that it is not Franklin that is being removed from Franklin Square, and that potentially many residents of Hobart had no idea who Crowther was until 4 or 5 years ago when this debate began. Cultural significance is like language. A language has been there forever, but it changes with time. We know that. My grandfather, who's still with us at 98, was an English headmaster, and he recognised that the changes to the English language that occur throughout time are part of language being a living thing, and cultural significance is the same being. It is a changing thing. And I notice that some councillors around the table have referenced that the statue has stood there forever. It's been there for 135 years. and it's a constant. The only constant in Hobart Nipaluna is Kunani and the River Derwent, and I apologise for not knowing the Aboriginal language for the River Derwent. Everything else changes, and there's evidence that Aboriginal people have lived in the valley with which the River Derwent flows for more than 8,000 years. So the statue has not stood there forever. The statue has stood there for a recent colonial past, especially when compared to the Tasmanian history. So I think that's important to point out. It is merely a blip in the history of this place. So I will support the planner's recommendations and the officer's recommendations, and I again thank the experts who have guided me to make this decision. I say Kapila Mana Wingani Putia, I'm sorry for the hurt this has caused to the Aboriginal people. Thank you. Nairi Ninantu.
Who's next? Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Look, I do want to, also acknowledge the journey that the Tasmanian Aboriginal community has been on with us now for quite some time, and thank them for their patience in this process. It has actually been a very in-depth, very professional, a very interesting, very multifaceted process, and I absolutely reject the suggestions by some people that we're tearing down a statue when the impression that is designed to give is that we're not thinking about things, we're not studying it, we're not considering history, we're not considering expert advice, we're not considering community views, we're just going out there and doing what we want. That is the absolute opposite of what this council has been doing for the last 3-4 years in this process. The process has did start through. It was interesting to hear that Jocelyn from the Royal Society said that this had first been raised in 2015. Personally, I first found out about it through the development of our reconciliation or our Aboriginal Commitment and Action Plan. And since then we've had this in-depth. As part of that plan, we were asked by the Tasmanian Aboriginal community whether we would consider the future of the Crowther statue. So we were asked, and rather than just making a decision on the run, we engaged in an in-depth community conversation with the broader community, because we did know that it was a significant issue for the broader community to consider, and we did that over 12 months with 4 different interpretive artworks around the statue to get that community conversation going. Most of that discussion, most of that debate, and most of those comments in the community actually haven't been divisive or nasty. Most of it has been very respectful. There is a small, unfortunate group of people that seem to want to use this particular project as their own sort of virtue signalling to their own people they want a virtue signal to. So I really reject this idea that there's one lot of virtue signalling going on. I think it's been an incredibly mature, considered process. I have really appreciated hearing tonight more in depth about the heritage advice, the addendum process, which I think some people have unfairly tried to slur that as well, is actually done, did a very deep dive into this statue that otherwise was in the previous conservation management plan, was almost like a footnote. I mean, it was noticed that it was there, but it actually didn't really consider that in any depth. The addendum process actually did do a really significant dive into the statue and to the square, and I really value that thoughtful process, because we do need to think about the cultural heritage issues, and I think that work was very, very high quality, world leading in fact. And I think we do need to recognise that these kind of conversations, these kind of council decisions to remove colonial statues are happening all over the world. They are happening all over the world. But I would have to say that the process that we have gone through over 3 years with the whole range of chapters to this project is really at a level that I haven't seen in other locations. And I do think it's been a highly respectful, intelligent and thoughtful process. So I reject the use of words like virtue signalling, divisive, policy on the run. I think that's just lazy to describe this process in that way. I think we've also all been told now very definitively that there is no precedent set. Every decision that a city makes about heritage is based on, and a whole range of things, is based on professional advice looking at and weighing up a whole range of issues and a whole range of views and opinions and professional advice. So there is no precedent set. We have made a decision about this particular statue based on all of that depth of work, all of that history, all of that heritage advice, all of that planning advice, all of that community consultation, all of that community engagement, all of that advice from the Heritage Council, all of that is there. So that is this decision. There is no precedent. And I do find this a little bit odious that there's a suggestion almost that, and I see this a lot with when we're talking about things that the Aboriginal community identify as important. There's always this view, where did they come up with that from? And it wasn't, they've said it's significant. And this kind of sneering sort of view that, that people, Aboriginal people, when they identified something as significant, there isn't actually a basis to it. Or if we give them that amount, they'll want more, which I saw a lot around the native title debates around Mabo and Wick, this kind of view that because people wanted their rights and their land rights acknowledged, that everyone's backyards were going to be taken. I mean, it's just this, unfortunately, we see this, it is a form of racism, the way that some of these suggestions that there's some sort of precedent being set here. And I think, and that's just been totally rejected by our professional planning and heritage advice. But yeah, all that said, the advice I think is very clear in terms of what we're doing tonight, which is through the planning scheme, and I will be supporting it because we are here to follow the expert advice on the planning scheme. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Councillor Sherlock.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I'm actually going to start with just addressing some of the mistruths that have been stated in this chamber tonight, and I feel like I've said it repeatedly in this chamber, and individuals who have said them saying it again, but it's already been addressed on many occasions, and also most recently when we had another motion come to council regarding Crowther. So the dangerous precedent issue that you already discussed, and it was already pointed out by Lucy as well, there's no dangerous precedent. That again is just fear-mongering. Number two, when we talk about the Barra Charter, as was already explained by the Director and Lucy as well, that was considered because the significance, the cultural significance, it changes over time. Councillor Kelly actually noted that with reference to cultural significance and talked about it in 2007, which was referenced before, and then a few years later somehow we've changed the cultural significance. Actually, no, it's been 16 years 2007 was that initial reference to the significance, and now 16 years later, it's changed because cultural significance changes over time, and I think Councillor Posselt reiterated that point really well. Again, Councillor Kelly raises the protection of Australia's commemorative places. It is irrelevant, and I said it in the last time I spoke when we were talking about this. It doesn't apply. So I'm just wondering why we keep bringing it up, and all I can think of is more fear-mongering. We're talking about policy on the run. Actually, no, as has been stated again, I've stated it numerous times, we started this whole process in 2016. So no, it's not policy on the run. That's about 4 or 5 different mistruths here, and it just makes me sick and tired of having to say this, because this kind of rubbish then goes out into our communities as though it's most certainly the truth. It is not. And you, of all people who are representing the community, are actually engaging in fear-mongering. It's unacceptable when the evidence is to the contrary. So is the judge, jury, executioner line of argument. That's an unacceptable fear-mongering as well. As has already been stated by the director, we do it all the time. And if you took the time to go and talk to individuals who've been here for a long time or how the planning process actually works, you wouldn't propagate more fear-mongering. Those are just some of the mistruths that I wanted to discuss, and I think it's really important certain people take a long, hard look at themselves. When we're talking about coexisting, maybe that's the compromise. The statue is gone, the plinth remains. Perhaps that's the compromise, that's coexisting. I do want to say one final thing, and I think that Alderman Bloomfield discussed with regards to just some of the disgusting and despicable behaviour and words that have been spoken in and around this particular topic. I find it absolutely deplorable. I find it disgusting, and in some senses I find it truly unforgivable. And some of those things that have been said, I said a particular thing in the other day, which is such emotive and pathos-inspired comments reveal an individual's moral compass is spinning
Councillor
to
Sherlock.
a prejudice magnet. No, I'm going to finish this.
Sherlock, I'll stop you right there. I did say at the beginning I wasn't going to allow this to get into a...
You allowed Councillor Ellett to talk about the voice. Why can't I just mention this?
Because we're making references to other elected members directly about things that have been said outside of
I didn't say anything.
this application.
I said I'm talking about a comment I made.
I know. Look, and I allowed the reflections that were made before because you were addressing matters that were brought up in this debate in regards to this application. But we're not talking about things that have happened in the media.
What was said before is that this was normalised behaviour. This was said in this chamber tonight. And you've allowed that, and now you're not allowing me to speak.
Point of order, Chair. I mean, this has no relevance to the planning scheme.
And that's my point. That's my point. I did pull other councillors up on relevance, and I've given a.
Those comments to the voice, those things that these kinds of behaviours were normalised behaviours. You didn't pull any of that up. No, you didn't.
There was a point of order made against Councillor Elliott, and I pulled it up on the relevance. I didn't take the point of order on the other point of order, but I did pull her up on relevance.
Right, I understand your point. I'm going to finish.
Well,
so such emotive and pathos-inspired comments reveal an individual's moral compass is spinning to a prejudice magnet that's stuck in the 1800s. I'm not in the 1800s. I'm in 2023 making a decision as a planning authority. And one final thing that I would like to say, and I think all of us actually received that email today or earlier, is I would like to apologise for the trauma, the hurt and offensive behaviour that some individuals who are elected representatives have stated. I do also want to apologise to Uncle Rodney and Auntie Denise for all of the hurt that may have been caused, and for them for bringing William Lanny's body back home.
Anybody else like to say anything? No, look, I'll say a few things then before we vote on the matter. Look, there was some talk of truth telling. I think Councillor Harvey referenced it. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I'll read straight from Professor Mackay's report here. Some of the research and understanding of which the re-evaluation of the cultural significance of the Crowther Monument is based has been called into question by new research. Truth-telling must be based on truth, and therefore additional research to enable a definitive understanding of Crowther, related historical events, and the involvement of others in desecration of Aboriginal human remains and other atrocities is warranted prior to action with respect to a memorial to one individual. And further consideration should be given to coexistence of cultural values as part of truth-telling, consistent with the priority afforded to cultural heritage in the scheme. For all of that's been said about the is this true, did this happen, did this not happen, did William Crowther do the thing or not do the thing, I think fundamentally that's not the consideration here tonight. I think we have as has been said, a statue that was erected over 100 years ago. We have our planning applications where housing is to be built, where with no community opposition, and we'll sit here and hotly debate it because we're talking about whether or not a non-heritage house that has particular articulations contributes to the heritage of an area. And now we're talking about a statue that's over 100 years old that memorialises a significant figure in Tasmanian history. If it wasn't a significant, and I'm not saying positive, but if it wasn't a significant contribution to the history of our state, we wouldn't be having this discussion right now, and it wouldn't be such a controversial and sensitive and passionately debated issue. And I think it's important that we do remember the pleasant parts of our history as well as the difficult parts of our history. I've got no problem with the signage, personally. I've got no problem with erecting things alongside the statue to provide the other parts of those stories. I think that's perfectly appropriate, and I think it's important that we do that. I don't think that removing what is a significant statue and a significant piece of our history is in any way in the spirit of what the heritage elements in our planning scheme are there to do, which is to maintain and preserve our heritage. There are sensitive ways to tell the entire story there, but I don't think removing statues, and for all the talk of we're not just pulling the statue down, there was consultation and years of process. That is true. We did go through all those steps, but we are here talking about pulling down a statue at the end of the day. I can't see it as being in line with those heritage provisions just because the council itself has decided that we want to change what our definition of significant heritage is in regards to this particular item. So I won't be supporting it. As has been said, I was supportive of putting up other interpretive works, but I won't be supporting this application tonight. For the most part, I would thank the committee here for what's been, for the most part, a respectful debate. It's probably one of the more difficult ones I've had the chair so far in the short time I've been chair. But did anybody else have any other comments to make before we move on to a vote? Councillor Dada.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make a final comment. I want to thank the staff for the time and the effort and the professionalism in which they have done the work since for the last 3 or 4 years. So I want to thank you for that. I think it's very significant.
Yeah. I'll actually agree with that, Councillor Dada. I think for all the heated politics around this, and there's certain aspects in reports that I've seen on this item and previous items that I may have disagreed with. I think at the end of the day, all the reports the staff have drafted have been because we've asked them to do so, and I think they've done what the council has told them to or asked them to. Whether or not I agree with the intent of some of those reports, that's on the council here, not on the staff. I think the staff have done exactly what they're asked to, and I think they've done that well. So I think that needs to be said. Is there any other comment? No, if not, we'll go to a vote then. All those in favour of the application, the recommendation is moved by the Deputy Lord Mayor.
Aye.
Say aye. Against say no. No. Show of hands.
Councillor Purcell, the Lord Mayor, Councillor Dutta, Councillor Sherlock, Alderman Bloomfield, Councillor Loberger, Councillor Harvey, and Deputy Lord Mayor.
And against?
Councillor Kelly and Chair Alderman Barakis.
That's obviously carried. For the gallery to filter out quickly and quietly, and then we'll move on to the rest of the meeting. Well, they really emptied out the room. All right, we'll move on to item 7.1, advertised applications report. Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Is there anything of interest?
Thank you, Chair. Just two items that are on that list that will be coming to committee most likely next round. So item 2, which is 93 Liverpool Street, which is for an adult shop next to the former Jetty Surf property. It's got seven objections.
Oh.
And the second one is item 27, which is 19 Hakea Drive, which is a simple application for a dwelling but includes clearing on council land, so it requires consideration by the planning committee.
Any questions? No, I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. You can say no, it's carried. Delegated decisions report, item 7.2. Thank you, Councillor Basalt. Any comment or questions? Councillor Dutta?
I just have a question with regards to the Sandy Bay property, which went for appeal for visitor accommodation. It went through mediation. I don't have my computer on, but I remember reading it in there. I'm just wondering where it is at this stage. Has the mediation taken place, or it's all confidential at this stage?
I think closed. It might be closed.
Through you, Chair, it might be better to discuss that item in closed.
Yeah, I think it's in the closed this month.
Any other questions? Nope, I'll put that.
Other questions?
Pardon me? Oh, these are just questions on this item. If not, I'll put that. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Can say no, it's carried. Responses to questions without notice, because somebody moved them.
So moved.
Oh, Councillor Basalt, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Can say no, it's carried.
Chair, can I just ask a question on the questions?
No, you're just asking your question.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
which is now the time to ask any questions. So, Councillor Basalt.
Thank you, Chair. Just to the Director, through you, just in reference to the response for short stay accommodation statistics, is it possible for us to commence a list prospectively of applications that are approved within strata dwellings for short stay?
Through you, Chair, subject to some parameters around what the committee would like to see, we'd be happy to provide statistics.
Thanks. Can we? I mean, we don't. This doesn't have to be recorded as a question without notice, but perhaps we could work through that as a committee offline sometime.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had one just actually about the list of approved stuff. So I'm just a little bit behind here. I just was interested in the approval for 2 Midwood Avenue. Any details that we could get from the Director about that one? It's just it's near where I live and it's quite an interesting reuse of a building. It might have been Homes Tas. It's a change of use to a food services building for 2 Midwood.
Through you, Chair, is this a reference to the
delegated decision
Yes,
report on
sorry,
the agenda.
yep,
Sorry,
yes.
and which?
I wasn't quick enough.
Sorry. Which property are you?
2 Midwood Avenue in Newtown, which is the former Springvale hostel next to Newtown High School. Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah.
Through you, Chair. It's the, I think the Migrant Resource Centre. They're going in there to provide food for the people that stay in the hostel, but they're also going to use it as a base for their catering facility, so they'll be providing food on that basis as well. So it required a change of use, yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Perfect.
Deputy.
Yes, I have two questions on 2 matters. Firstly, can the Acting Director please advise as to the number of residential dwelling development approvals that are waiting to be substantially commenced, including ancillary dwellings and multi-residential developments?
Through you, Chair, I'm able to answer that question with some parameters. We recently did an analysis of properties which had planning approval but had not yet progressed to building approval. That was 476 dwellings that are able to be commenced but haven't yet. I will just say that had those, there were some parameters around those statistics. So that was for private developments, so not social housing projects. It was for those projects in excess of $1 million, so it wouldn't have captured the smaller ancillary dwellings, for example, at the back of existing properties. And it was for permits going back for the 6 years to mid-July, and also for multiple dwelling applications. So, so that is a substantial number of dwellings, but there are potentially more if we were to dive a little bit deeper and go into some of the other application parameters.
So essentially 476 not yet commenced.
Correct. Haven't progressed to building approval stage.
My second question is around the Tasman Hospital development at 48 Newtown Road. I mean, it's and other neighbouring properties, and it was something that the Lord Mayor received as well today. So, in relation to the failed Tasman Hospital development at 48 Newtown Road, announced last week that the proponents are abandoning the project. Given that this approved project has taken approximately 6 years to get to this point, what discussions have or are occurring with the state government and the proponent in being able to deliver the project in some form?
Through you, Chair, I have had a thorough discussion with the representative of the applicant for that proposal, and I asked whether or not this was a genuine decision or whether there was a ploy to try and get some further funding, and the response was that all funding options had been thoroughly considered and they were not able to continue with the project.
Thank you. Along this same 48 Newtown Road property, is there capacity that this site could be instead used as housing by the state government, including for social or innovative solutions to housing?
Through you, Chair, the short answer to that question is yes. It's zoned urban mixed-use zone, and there is the option for, of course, subject to meeting the planning scheme requirements, that it could be used for housing, and Mr Noy has already had some preliminary discussions with the state government to explore that option.
Okay, and lastly, in the interest of public safety from contaminants, and I know I've asked a similar question through the elected members portal, but in the interests of public safety from contaminants, what responsibility does the proponent have in ensuring that the mediation work is completed before the site may be sold? Is the council assured that this site is safe for those in the vicinity from contaminants?
Through you, Chair, the applicant is, or the developer is well aware of their legislative obligations to ensure that the site is safe and free from, in particular, asbestos. The comment was made to me with the applicant that they had done so. We will be taking steps to ensure that we don't regulate asbestos, but we will be taking steps to ensure that, in terms of our compliance framework, that they have done what they need to do at this point before they sell the property.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Lord Mayor.
Just following on that asbestos side of things, who is the regulatory process, who does regulate and check and do all that work?
Through you, Chair, it's regulated by WorkSafe, as I understand it, although I'm not really able to talk in any detail about that, Lord Mayor.
So if people have concerns about it, they should ask WorkSafe to go and look at things?
Through you, Chair, yes, I think that's the case.
Councillor Kelly.
Through you to the Director, you just talked about those 400 odd houses or haven't been commenced construction. Did you have a median price on what typically a house in Hobart, well not typically, what the median price is for a house being constructed in Hobart?
Through you, Chair, no I don't. I'd have to take that one on notice.
Because I'd suggest that quite a lot are under $1 million, so that figure I would imagine would be substantially more than the 400 odd houses, yeah. And for many reasons, of course, yeah.
Any other questions?
I just had one. Just wondering if 66 Alexander Street is in that list of houses that have got approval. It's just been sitting there empty, that block, for quite a while.
Through you, Chair, I'd have to take that one on
Thank
notice.
you.
Okay, with that, does somebody want to move that we close the open and open the close?
Yes.
Councillor Harvey, I think. All those in favour say aye. All against say no. Carried. Thank you very